really excited about that they exhibit and the cups that have come into it, and cups and drinking vessels in general have been something that's always been sort of at the forefront of my interest as a potter and also as a consumer of pottery. What I thought in terms of these, I just thought I'd put some slides together just to talk a little bit about cups and thinking about them, and then actually go through then the different artists whose work was selected. Jeremy Wallace, who's the juror of the show, wasn't able to be here this evening, but he was really impressed with the work that he selected for the show, and found that there was really some pieces that he sort of really resonated with, and so he found it a thoroughly enjoying process, So, but anyway, so I'm going to quote somebody else, actually a juror for a previous show that I had done, that I loved what he wrote. This is Dan Finnegan. He's a potter in Virginia, trained actually in England. But as he says there, and as you can see, he says, "I believe that a handmade mug can change the world." Small thing. Cuddled in the hands, raised to the lip, carrying our favorite beverage. Nothing that we make is more intimate or useful at the same time. And I love that, what a challenge to sort of throw out there in terms of what can a cup do. But I think he's actually right in terms of, if you think about art and sculpture and just, there is nothing more intimate. Whether it be in our hands or touching our lips. And so that is something that's sort of neat and unique about it. And so one of the things that we get to enjoy as the makers of that. So I'm going to run through just some cups that I think illustrate some of these kinds of what I think are the challenges, because in some ways, functionally, yes, you could use a styrofoam cup or a plastic cup. I mean, they carry the liquid to your mouth. But why use a handmade ceramic mug or cup? And I think it's because it does something different. It adds, it enriches. And then I think in some ways as potters, this is the kind of challenge and puzzle that we have of how do we do it? What are the kinds of things that we're looking at? So first, thinking about what is a cup, even, so handleless cups or tea bowls, or what are also called unomis in terms of Japan. Now, these are two, and it's interesting. The one on the left is Jeff Astrike, who's in Minnesota. Wayne Branham is there on the right. Actually, both of them were teachers of mine. But it's interesting. I mean, both are dealing with geometry, but they're dealing with it in very different ways. Jeff in a more sculptural way. Wayne, who's actually also trained as an architect, is very much sort of doing it both in the physical part of squaring it, but also in terms of the decoration. But you can also think about, there are different potters who will go much more, in terms of the decorating and the design on it. And these two cups, the one on the left is Ron Myers, who's down in Georgia. And makes has these various sort of animals that he's scratching through the slip, and there are these wonderful sort of earthenware, loosely thrown cups. The one on the right is Bede Clark, and he has this wonderful sort of geometry that he does with his designs. Both of them, in a sense, are doing the same thing, but you can see the differences in how they've, in a sense, handled it. And thinking about cups, the one on the left is a footed cup. The other is an unfooted cup, but it has a sort of cut or recessed foot. And by the way, as I talk, feel free to jump in and say, "Oh, I like that," or whatever in response to things. So I don't want it just to be me talking. If folks want to be talking and discussing, I think so. One of the things I also think is tumblers. Tall cups, in effect. And these three are similar and yet very different in terms of like how they all handled the issue of how do you do a tumbler. The one on the left is from France. It's Hervé Rousseau, who's in the Libourne region of France. And so it's a wood-fired one, and you can see it's decorated with underglazes and playing with sort of geometry. The middle one is Matt Wren, who's in Pennsylvania. And you can see the fish that are in size, but he's also pushed out the cup. And so it ends up sort of this sort of undulation as the fish are sort of swimming there in that, in that deep. And then the one on the right is Mark Hewitt, a North Carolina potter who was trained in England. Interestingly, also, you see the little sort of square on the top of it. That's bottle glass. And so he's using, in a sense, what's a very traditional North Carolina technique. And I think it wonderfully, for a very sort of tight tumbler, gives this sort of randomness within it. Anyway, and then, thinking about other cups, mugs, handled cups, and the choices that you have. The one on the left is Byron Temple, and it's a one-fingered cup. It is very much, it's a funny kind of contrast where you have a very sort of controlled cylinder of the cup, and yet a very fluid handle that comes off of it. Andrew Kellner's is the middle one there. And there, the whole cup is, in a sense, in flux and fluidity. And then even more so as Tony Clennell, the one on the right, where there's all sorts of stuff happening between the feet on the bottom and the handle coming in there, and things are being pushed out left and right, and then the decoration fits it there. But interesting also, you can see the differences in the size of the handle and that kind of decision point of whether it's a one-fingered, two-fingered, or Tony's is more sort of multi-fingered. And then just in terms of thinking even about the handle, do you do a spine? Do you have it raised there? Or do you have a groove that's there? I always think about like what feels right. And this notion again of the intimacy of it, that you really get to know a mug, you feel it, you sort of know, sort of what it's like in your hand. As I'm going to tell the story, a great potter out of Minnesota, Linda Christensen, makes wonderful mugs and beautiful handles. And I had this wonderful mug that my wife and I would fight over. I mean, not literally fight, but somewhat fight over in terms of who would get it in the morning. And then it broke. It was like tragedy. It's like, oh, yeah. And then, I found a gallery that had a couple of her mugs. And so I bought two of her mugs, and they came. They're beautiful mugs. We both prefer one of the two. Again, it's this notion of like, what does it feel? And that's one of the difficulties as a juror, as we're talking about things, as we're sort of starting to shift towards this show, is the having to judge the work visually when so much of when you talk about appreciation of a vessel and a cup is also how it feels, the weight, the way, how the size of it. One other thing in terms of thinking about cups is, is it round or not round, or how do you take it out of round? And Takuro Shibata is the one on the left, and you can see that how he shaved off to make it what was in a sense a round vessel into a triangle, whereas B. Clark's he has a little like sort of bump out, which wonderfully fits, that web between your thumb and your forefinger. And so then just to move to the bottom, to the foot, what kind of a foot do you do? The decisions that you have. The one, the highest in the top is from Randy Johnson. It's out in Minnesota. And there is a foot that is, sort of uniform and geometric and, fits the rest of the vessel. The middle foot is Ron Myers, and it fits that kind of crazy, sort of kind of demonic pig that's, sort of done there. And then the bottom one is Warren McKenzie, and it's an interesting, it's a foot that doesn't have a ring inside of it, but it is a one way to, in a sense, do a trimmed foot. But then you can get even crazier. You can do, as Takuro did, in terms of that he mimicked the top of the bottom is foot with the top in the same kind of carving and triangulation. And then the one on the right is beads one, which is this it has these crazy bits of clay put on and then merged with the pot. So it fits all of that. Anyway, so those are some of my thoughts about pots and the kinds of decisions and the kinds of things to think about, which then sort of shifts it to the, let's look at the show and see what's in the show and see what folks did and why things kind of worked the way they did. And I will say that it was also a very competitive show. Close to 60% of the pots that were entered were rejected from the show. And you know, again, for folks who were rejected, you know, one juror may disagree with another, so it isn't, you know, I don't want to suggest that it's the one's work is in some ways lacking, but Jeremy drew sort of a high standard in terms of what would make it in. So let's talk about it. And I'll start with the pots that well, actually, let me start with the pot that actually he selected for the prize for the show. It's the bowl on the tea bowl on the left. It's called Crusty Bowl. The picture doesn't do it justice. It's about 6 inches across, so it is a large bowl there. And you know, again, for folks who may have seen the show, you know, you get a chance to see it up there. I mean, it really does speak to the firing and the firing process. I mean, it shows that it's gone through hell and back again. But interestingly, for as crusty as its name is, you know, it suggests, and as large as it is, you see what the way that with the foot that he has on it is a relatively low foot, but it gives it just enough lift off the ground, so he has that shadow line. And that shadow line is an important piece. Sometimes people forget that and they like cut off their pots, and so they end up getting like stuck to the ground. And so that was wonderful there. The second cup that he did, he uses chicken grit, you know, bits of feldspar, and you can see how that's sort of like ripping through the clay in the throwing. And the other thing that's wonderful in that and the glaze is that black there at the top is actually carbon trapping. And so the glaze actually melted at a low temperature and trapped the free carbon in the kiln. And so you get this wonderful sort of expression of both the making and the firing. Anyway, Brian's work is just really interesting and neat. But here's something that's very different that was in the show. Joan Ulrich's pots are in many ways the opposite of Brian's. I mean, they are, you know, very refined. Her tumblers, they really are like a canvas for the work. And she does, you know, sort of, you know, it's a loose geometry coming off of it, but she softens the lines of the geometry with soda firing. The mug is wonderful, you know, in terms of if you look at the way that the glazing mimics the form. And she has a wonderful handle on what's kind of a difficult shape to actually get a nice handle on to, you know, the way that she carries that curve up coming up from the bottom. So I think it's really kind of neat. And again, jump in anytime if folks want to talk about any of these pots, but Jones's, I think are very, you know, consistently nice. You know, and interesting pots from Ohio, from Jen and Knight. You know, they're interesting in multiple ways. You know, they have a lovely handle that, you know, that thickens at both ends. They've got this wonderful decoration too, and I forget, I think this is patchwork yellow and orange, but it looks like it's sewn there on it. But what I particularly like, and I was very pleased, she also included a picture of the bottom, because her design just sort of carries over to that. And so it's this wonderful like little surprise that you might not realize it's there, but then when you see it and know it's there, it just adds a little something to the pot. And another potter whose work was selected was John Shaw's from Minnesota. And he similarly carries his decoration down through to the bottom of the pot. I'm forgetting the name of this. Is Carnival, something Carnival, and it feels that way. I mean, there is this like very sort of playful way to it. So I think it's really nicely done, and really sort of setting off the decoration with the white clay. And in talking about decoration, Marcel's work is just, you know, really outstanding. The two nicely illustrate two different ways of having a very sort of graphically focused cup. The one on the left, it may be less clear in the photo, is graffito. So he's actually carving through the black slip to reveal the image, in this case, the creature from the Black Lagoon. And whereas the one on the right is done with underglaze. I think it's Nicotine Fiend or something is what it's called. But both are wonderful. He had a background in fashion and in design and stuff, and so there's a way that his knowledge of sort of fabric and fiber sort of comes through, you see, in a lot of the ways that he fills the background, you know, around his images. You know, they feel very sort of textile. Laurie has this, you know, we're talking about, you know, different mugs and different kind of handles. I mean, here's a full handle mug, you know, one that you know, there's no sort of, you know, this isn't a dainty mug. You know, that this is going to be your full beer or your cup of tea. What's interesting about it and why I sort of position it next to Marcel's is you know, also that, you know, she does the cut lines through the bare clay, but they're glazed there, and my guess, I didn't see her. She wasn't able to make it, and some of her students were there, but she wasn't able to make it to the show. But you know, I think she's using wax resist because that's actually glaze that's in there. And so there's a kind of a nice sort of mimicking of what's happening in the bottom with the top. That same blue glaze is coming there through. Well, James, and maybe you want to talk about some of, I would be curious to hear more about your firing, but I thought these were just wonderfully sort of showing the fire and showing that, you know, I love the rough edge, the way that it just feels very sort of elemental.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So it is pretty elemental. I'm not I've only taken one ceramic class in my life back in 2010. And I never took to the wheel. I always like hand building. And so all of my pieces are done using a banting wheel and things like bamboo spoons that you get at the grocery store. And I mean, I use ribs and stuff like that too. And then this was utilizing a glaze, a white salt glaze that I put an iron oxide wash around it, and to pretty, what I think is pretty cool effect. So I really like the Cha Wan. I've always been drawn to that form since I started doing pottery. I love the concept of wabi sabi, the perfection of imperfection, and the beauty in that simplicity. And so I like having a natural rim and things like that. So
yeah, no, I think it's wonderful, and I do like that there's a frostiness to the glaze that it's quite lovely.
Yeah, this is a cone 10 reduction as well, so it just did really wonderful stuff. So I was very happy with how that glaze interacted with the iron oxide and the clay.
Yeah, and while I'm showing one picture, I actually Jeremy accepted all three of your pieces. Yeah, because yeah, they're very nice.
Thank you.
And I may be mispronouncing his name, Kichi, who's in New York. A very different kind of, you know, it's almost like, you know, doing a soft canvas and letting the wood firing sort of do the decorating on the pots. You know, so they're, you know, they are not identical twins. They each show their sort of different, sort of growth in life, in terms of that. And so there's a way that they feel connected and related, but they're siblings in their life through the making and the firing. And so they're very nice, very, very sort of quiet, sweet pots. Ian's pot is also wood fired. It's using a dark lagunid clay, and then using a lot of slips to then try to accentuate some of the different effects of the firing. It is also really nice. It's got a very sort of refined foot, with where the decoration itself is much more sort of free flowing and almost random. Benjamin's work is out of Illinois. One of the things that's most interesting, even for potters who look at his work, is it's not wheel thrown, it's slab built. And so people look at it and it looks wheel thrown. He does a really nice job of integrating the slab and pulling it together so that you would not expect that. A kind of wonderful sort of Frank Lloyd Wright like decoration in terms of that, which sort of fits his area of where he's coming from. The other thing that's interesting, and I talked about different handles and different kinds of handles, is the handle that's there on this little short mug here. It's an incredibly comfortable handle, and it wonderfully fits the form. Echoing the kind of arching that he has at the base, which helps lift up his pots. So they're quite nice. And then the last one, talking about sort of technique and stuff, is Beaky, who's using the crystalline glazes. And really, I think very nicely is doing forms that help accentuate it and really sort of bring it to life in a way that also sometimes that glaze can almost feel a little overwhelming, even gaudy, and yet hers feel very sort of restrained. And I think she's demonstrating sort of a good understanding and control. It's been interesting because I've seen her work over the years, and I've seen it sort of evolve and shift and change, and it's really nice. So that is the show. So my last sort of question, and I'll take it off of like this sharing thing, is kind of like, what's your favorite cup and what makes it your favorite? And